Hey everyone, welcome back. You're deep in it with the UPSC prep, especially those IR sections.
Yeah,
So today we're going to do a deep dive that might just give you an edge.
sounds good.
We're tackling Niccolo Machiavelli.
Machiavelli, always a fascinating figure.
He's often seen as this cynical, almost like a villain.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the whole ends justify the means thing, but there's so much more to him than that.
Exactly. We're going to go way beyond those sound bites and pull out the insights that are really going to help you understand, what makes nations tick on the world stage.
And hopefully help you craft those killer answers for your UPSC essays.
Okay, so let's start with what was driving Machiavelli.
Well, he lived in a time of crazy political turmoil. Italy was super fragmented, tons of conflict.
So this wasn't some ivory tower philosopher guy.
No, not at all. He saw firsthand the damage that weak leadership and a lack of unity could cause.
And this really shaped his thinking.
Absolutely. He craved order and stability. He was convinced that a strong, unified republic was the key, a morally strong society.
It's interesting because that idea that national unity equals national strength, that's still huge in international relations even today.
Oh, yeah. Think about it. If a country's divided internally, other nations see that as a weakness, right? It affects everything, their military, how they form alliances, even their economy.
But then we get to Machiavelli's view of human nature.
Not exactly sunshine and roses.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
He basically said we're all selfish, power-hungry, capable of deception. Does that ring true when you look at how countries actually behave?
Well, look at history. Look at the news today. It's hard to argue with him. Nations often act in their own self-interest, even if it hurts others. Arms races, land grabs, fighting over economic dominance. These are all classic examples of what Machiavelli was talking about.
So if we're all so flawed at our core, how can a nation actually become strong and stable?
That's where his concept of civic virtue comes in.
Civic virtue.
Yeah, he believed that it wasn't enough to just have a strong leader or a unified nation on paper. The people themselves, their character that matters too.
So what did he mean by civic virtue? Like just being a good person?
More than that, it's about having courage, integrity, putting the needs of the state above your own personal gain, and being a true patriot.
I see. So it's like an antidote to all that selfishness and corruption he was talking about.
Exactly. Civic virtue strengthens a nation from the inside out. It's like the glue that holds everything together.
This is all gold for those UPSC essays, by the way.
Right. You can connect these concepts to so many real-world examples.
Okay, now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Machiavelli's stance on religion.
Yes. A bit controversial, to say the least.
He wasn't exactly anti-religion,
But he was definitely wary of the church's influence on politics.
Right. He saw religion as a powerful tool, something that could promote those civic virtues we were talking about.
But one that needed to be carefully controlled by the state.
I mean, going up against the church back then, that was a bold move.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how much does religion impact international relations today?
It's a huge question. On the one hand, you've got shared religious values sometimes bringing countries together. But then you've got religious differences fueling conflicts and violence. And of course, you can't forget the role of religious organizations in humanitarian aid and development. It's complicated.
Super complicated. Okay, so we've got Machiavelli advocating for national unity, civic virtue, and then he throws us this curveball.
What's that?
He actually said he preferred pagan morality over Christian morality.
Yeah, that one raised some eyebrows.
Yeah.
But it's important to understand what he meant.
So unpack it for us.
He was a huge admirer of the ancient Romans, their courage, their military strength, their commitment to the republic.
He was really into that whole classical Roman thing.
Oh, yeah. He felt those qualities, those pagan virtues, were crucial for any leader who wanted to build a strong and lasting state.
But he wasn't saying, let's all go back to worshiping Zeus.
No. It was more about emphasizing certain values that he felt were missing in the Christian worldview.
Okay, so what were these pagan virtues he was so into?
Things like courage, strength, a willingness to defend your interests, even if it means using force. He saw these as essential for surviving in the cutthroat world of international politics.
So it wasn't about being a bad person.
No. He was drawing a distinction between personal morality and what's necessary for a leader to protect the state. A tough call sometimes.
This is all great stuff for anyone prepping for the UPSC, especially those IR questions that ask you to analyze different ethical dilemmas.
Absolutely.
So if you're finding this helpful, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We'll be back with part 2, where we'll dive even deeper into Machiavelli's world.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back. We were just getting into Machiavelli's ideas about morality, especially a whole thing about pagan virtues.
Right, and it's important to remember, he wasn't saying ditch your morals altogether. He was talking about this difference between, like, your personal ethics
Yeah,
and the tough decisions a leader might have to make for the good of the state.
exactly. He believed that the state's well-being, its security, those had to come first for a ruler.
Even if it meant making choices that wouldn't fly in your everyday life.
Right. Sometimes those choices might even seem morally wrong when you look at them through a personal lens. But for Machiavelli, the goal was to preserve the state to keep it strong.
So it's not about being power hungry, it's about recognizing that leadership, especially on that global stage, often involves making really hard choices.
Choices with consequences, yeah. But ultimately, those choices are about protecting the nation's interests.
This is where Machiavelli's ideas can be so helpful for those of you studying IR for the UPSC. It gives you a different way to look at things.
It helps you understand those leaders who make decisions that seem kind of shady. You can see the logic behind them even if you don't agree.
Okay, so we've got morality and leadership. Now let's talk about something else. Machiavelli was really concerned about corruption.
Oh yeah, he saw that as a huge threat.
Most people would agree that corruption is bad, but for Machiavelli, it was like this existential threat to the nation itself.
He believed that corruption could eat away at a nation's strength from the inside out. Whether it's in the government or among the people, it weakens the whole system.
So how did he think you could fight corruption? Did he have any solutions?
Well, he was all about practicality. He believed that sometimes you need a really strong leader to get things back on track.
Even if that leader has to use some pretty tough tactics.
Exactly. That's where the whole ends justify the means idea comes in.
But that can be a dangerous idea, can it? I mean, it sounds like it could lead to all sorts of abuse of power.
He knew that. He wasn't saying just give absolute power to anyone. He believed a strong leader should be driven by the common good, not by their own ego.
So it's not just about having a powerful leader, it's about the people, too.
Right. The people need to be involved, hold their leaders accountable, make sure things are running fairly.
Speaking of powerful figures, we can't forget about Machiavelli's friendship with Leonardo da Vinci.
Now, that's a fascinating duo. Two of the greatest minds of the Renaissance just hanging out, bouncing ideas off each other.
It makes you wonder what they talked about.
Right. Maybe Leonardo was sketching his flying machines while Machiavelli was explaining his theories of power.
It's like a Renaissance brainstorming session. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that.
We can only imagine. But it's pretty amazing to think about how their conversations might have shaped their thinking.
Okay, so we've covered morality, corruption, and even a little bit of Renaissance gossip. Now let's get to the heart of it. Machiavelli's thoughts on diplomacy and how nations should act on the world stage,
This is where it gets really interesting for those of you focusing on IR.
especially for those UPSC exams.
Exactly. Machiavelli had a lot to say about how states should interact with each other, how to build alliances, how to survive in that whole game of international politics.
So for all you aspiring diplomats out there, listen up. What were Machiavelli's big ideas?
Well, first of all, he was a realist. He believed that nations, just like people, act in their own self-interest.
So no rose-colored glasses there.
Nope. He saw the world as a competitive place where everyone is trying to get ahead.
But he didn't think war was the answer, did he?
He actually saw war as a last resort, something to avoid, if at all possible.
So what was his preferred strategy?
He was a big believer in alliances. But he said, you have to choose your allies carefully. Make sure they're actually going to benefit you.
Don't just team up with anyone.
Right. He also stressed the importance of clear communication, understanding what the other side wants, knowing their strengths and weaknesses.
And being willing to compromise sometimes.
Exactly. It's all about being strategic and always keeping your own nation's best interests in mind.
Machiavelli would have made a pretty impressive diplomat himself.
I think so. He really understood human nature and how to play the game.
But I'm curious about something. Machiavelli focused mainly on states. But what about all those other players on the world stage today?
You mean like NGOs, international organizations, even big corporations?
Exactly. How do they fit into his ideas?
That's a great question. Machiavelli didn't really anticipate those kinds of groups becoming so powerful.
So is he irrelevant now?
Not at all. His ideas about power, about strategy, about alliances and competition, those are all still relevant. You can apply them to these new players, too.
So we can still learn from him, even though the world has changed a lot.
Definitely. And for our UPSC folks, that's a key takeaway. Being able to take these classic ideas and apply them to modern situations, that's what shows a deep understanding.
Okay, before we move on, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you're finding this helpful. We'll be back soon with the final part of our Machiavelli deep dive.
Ah.
Welcome back, everyone. We've been on quite a journey with Machiavelli, haven't we?
We have, from human nature to civic virtue to his ideas about leadership and morality
And let's not forget that fascinating connection with Leonardo da Vinci.
to Renaissance giants sparking ideas off each other.
Okay, so we've got some great questions from our listeners who are eager to apply Machiavelli's thinking to the real world.
Excellent. Let's hear them.
This first one gets right to the heart of it. They ask, Machiavelli seems to say you need a strong leader to fight corruption and keep things stable. But doesn't that lead to authoritarianism? How does that work with democracy?
That's a big question, and it's one that's been debated for centuries. It's about finding the right balance, between individual freedom
Right.
and the need for order and security. Machiavelli was writing at a time when things were really chaotic.
Italy was a mess.
Yeah, so it's understandable that he thought a strong, decisive leader was the solution. But he wasn't advocating for dictatorships.
So it's more nuanced than that.
Definitely. He believed that a good leader should be focused on the common good, not on personal gain. And that's where civic virtue comes in again.
So the people have a role to play too.
Absolutely. An engaged and informed citizenry can help keep leaders in check and make sure power isn't being abused.
Okay, here's another one. This listener wants to know about Machiavelli's views on diplomacy in today's world.
Diplomacy was huge for Machiavelli. He saw it as the key to navigating those complex alliances and rivalries in Italy back then.
And a lot of his principles still hold up today.
Right. Oh, yeah. Things like clear communication, strategic thinking, understanding the other side's motivations. Those are all timeless.
But he also knew that diplomacy has its limits.
Right. He was a realist. He knew that military strength matters in international relations. Sometimes you need to be able to back up your words with action.
So it's about having a strong military, not for starting wars, but for preventing them.
Exactly. It's about deterrence and making sure your diplomatic efforts are taken seriously.
One last question.
Yeah.
This one's about those non-state actors we were talking about before, like NGOs and international organizations.
The ones Machiavelli didn't really write about.
Yeah, they ask, how do those groups fit into his framework?
It's true Machiavelli was focused on states, but his core principles about power strategy alliances, those still apply.
So you can use his ideas to understand how these non-state actors operate and how they interact with governments.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's about adapting his insights to the 21st century.
And that's a key skill for anyone studying IR, especially for the UPSC. Being able to connect those classic theories to the modern world.
Well said.
So we've come to the end of our deep dive into Machiavelli. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have. It's been quite a journey.
But this is just the beginning for you all out there. Keep exploring Machiavelli's work. Keep thinking critically and keep asking those tough questions.
The world of international relations is full of challenges and opportunities. We wish you all the best in your UPSC journey and beyond.
And if you found this deep dive helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful content. Thanks for joining us.